how half the US lost part of their minds. A preamble. Never really engaged with the content of Howtown before, but from the sort of preliminary assessment, well, that I've had, I thought they were like kind of like a politics, like sort of like lib channel. Perhaps we're going into some of the history for as to how we got to the point of why a lot of conservatives have generally sort of like lost their minds. But from what I understand from Boy Meets Mini, after being partially informed, this is a science channel that mostly goes into a bunch of sort of talks about particulates, I believe is the term, within either food supplies or the water supplies that have caused, I suppose, a quote unquote sort of IQ dampening effect on conservatives. Because very often, if you talk about conservatives, now obviously they're being a bit more nonpartisan about this. I will be partisan about this. I don't really give much of a shit at all. Yeah, conservatives are in general, way more fucking stupid than your average fucking liberal. It is what it is. It's just how the fuck it is. Okay, they are 10 times more stupid and incapable of sort of like acting in a sort of open-minded ways and being interested in having a lot of their dogmatic views being inherently fucking challenged. That's not ridiculous. That's not hyperbolic to say. That's just a fact. But I digress. So, Howtown here is, from what I understand from Boy Meets Mini, going to go into more so a lot of the reasonings, the scientific sort of reasonings, why conservatives are the way that they are. We already know of some of the studies that have led to this. We know that, is it the amygdala? I don't remember what like part of the brain is supposed to trigger fear responses within conservatives, because there's already been studies done into this, but the part of the brain that triggers fear responses within humans tends to be significantly bigger in that of a conservative, because these are people who are constantly in fucking fear. And this is like something that gets drilled into the minds of a lot of people when they're fucking growing up. You have to be in fear of God. You have to be in fear of the government from like causing suffering to you. You have to be in fear of the devil. You have to be in fear of all these different things. Fear, 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 fear. It's almost as if that's their broader sort of political strategy that they use in order to get people out to the fucking polls. But I digress. But there's also a lot of things like leaded pipes, lead and gasoline. That's generally speaking, sort of seen as the main sort of reasoning for as to why there was a big crime wave in the United States of America during the 90s, because of really poor regulations of pipes, and also gasoline having a lot more lead within it, that of course causing developmental issues in a lot of people during that time. And then they got taken out of the pipes, taken out of the fucking gasoline, and crime dropped down fucking precipitously as a result of the removing of the fucking goddamn lead. Shocker, I know, it's crazy. So I'm going to assume that we're probably going to go along down the sort of like microplastic route, if I were to take a guess. Maybe there will be mention of like leaded gasoline and pipes that have had a sort of adverse effect on previous generations in terms of their sort of development, for as to why they've become more fearful and perhaps, generally speaking, a lot more fucking a lot more like fear based and a lot more reactionary, generally speaking. Okay, so the amygdala is emotional responses. The hippocampus is where memories form and can be affected by the amygdala. Okay, so I was correct. It was the amygdala. I did remember that study correctly. But not to mention, an issue that's also helping to exacerbate this problem is, unironically, the Trump administration trying to abolish the Department of Education with Linda McMahon. Basically, conservatives want you to just get just enough education for you to be able to operate the machinery and all of the sort of knickknacks and doodads that corporations use in order to be able to do their fucking business. But stupid enough that they can easily lie to you and you just buy their fucking goddamn narratives that they consistently spin in order to make sure that you continue voting for their general sort of fucking project, right? Trump himself fucking said it perfectly. I love stupid people. They are my favorite people. Because they're very, 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 very fucking gullible. What do we have to... What does Howtown have to say here?
By the way, should we talk about the fact that you mailed me your teeth?
Yeah.
So creepy, Adam.
I recently sent Josh 2 of my baby teeth, one scavenged from a series of nested boxes in my garage, another discovered by my parents.
Here it is.
I knew these teeth could tell me how much I had been poisoned as a child, and Josh was able to hand them off to another New Yorker, one of the world's leading tooth detectives.
Teeth are like a time machine. It allows you to travel into your past, and one of the things that we can measure really well is this toxicant called lead.
Lead is so...
Oh, I was correct. Yeah, it's about fucking leaded pipes and lead in gasoline. But... big fucking brain here. Yeah, I'm a 5-head, dude.
So poisonous. Extreme exposure causes violent hallucinations, convulsions, it can kill you. But it turns out even tiny amounts of lead can mess up your mind, body, and personality. And recent studies have found that about half the population of the US was exposed.
How has those exposures changed the course of American history and health? It could rate as one of the largest environmental injustices in human history.
I wanted to find out what was in my baby teeth if lead had quietly altered my mind, and how a poison so subtle you might not notice it managed to reshape the minds of 170 million people.
The answer to that question is yes. I think the studies have been more or less done at this point. That the main reasoning for as to why the crime wave that happened in the 90s, why it happened is because of a lot of leaded pipes and lead in fucking gasoline, right? Like, again, lead being in the fucking water, that affects your brain's developmental processes. And also all of the lead in the gasoline, that also affects. I'm just curious. When was lead taken out of gasoline in the US? I recall, was this in the 80s or the 70s? Lead was completely phased out of gasoline for on-road vehicles on January 1st, 1996, following a gradual phase down mandated by the EPA starting in the 70s. But it was fully done in 1985, or, quickly as the AI overview here is saying, is 1986, right? So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that the crime wave that started in the 90s is because that it affected, generally speaking, like a lot of the baby boomers and a lot of fucking Gen Xers, who tend to be, I believe, the people who perpetrated the fucking crimes. And then it was seen like, wait a minute, we may have some fucking problems here in terms of people's developmental sort of processes, if they are, I don't know, being forced to constantly huff more fucking goddamn lead and drink a bunch more of it. And, well, it was definitely too fucking late. And as a result of the regulation that was finally investigated and saying, like, yeah, lead's going to have some problems with developmental processes in people, especially because of a lot of the implementation of suburban architecture and the carification of America, given the fact that there is a lot of leaded pipes and also lead in fucking gasoline from all the fucking emissions that are going on, it makes a lot of sense that a lot of people started to ingest more and more fucking lead, whether it be through the water supply or from the fucking air by breathing in the fucking air that's been basically infected with a bunch of lead that may have caused a significant increase within crime during the fucking 90s. Not to mention all of the economic instabilities that was caused also by Ronald fucking Reagan. That's also a very, very important aspect to focus on as well. There was a recession that happened during Reagan's sort of presidency that the U.S. was not properly able to fucking recover from. And Bill Clinton sure as shit was not going to do really all that much about it either. Like, he did fucking cuts to Social Security, of course. Not Social Security, but to the welfare state, rather, during his tenure as fucking president. Because, I don't know, like, weirdo fucking Epstein associate Bill Clinton, it turns out he also fucking really was not a big fan of the poor either. And as a result of these factors, not only also people's brains being affected by the lead in the air and in the fucking pipes, made it such that they were more sort of inclined to be criminals, more inclined to want to do fucking violence. And of course, what did the U.S. do in response to that, instead of letting the EPA regulation take a hold and allowing the lead levels to precipitously decrease and essentially help with mental health services, they prefer to just take the punitive route and just have a bunch of cops roaming the streets, arresting whoever they fucking see. Thank you, the Crime Act of 1994. Very, very fucking cool.
We partnered with Riverside on this episode. This is Herbert Needleman, the man who helped expose the hidden harms of lead. He was a pediatrician, a professor, and sometimes a tooth fairy. In 1975, Needleman was at Boston Children's Hospital studying the effects of lead on children in these working-class suburbs. At the time, it was common to test for lead by drawing blood, but that only gave a sense of recent exposures. Needleman knew that if he wanted a record of exposure from infancy, he'd have to look at teeth. Your first teeth start forming months before you're born, and one of the major building blocks is, of course, calcium. Lead looks a lot like calcium. It has the same charge and similar size, so the body readily absorbs it and lodges it permanently in our teeth. So, Needleman knows that teeth contain this record of early lead exposure, right? It's the lead exposure that they would have had in the womb and then their first couple years of life. And so he went to elementary schools and recruited teachers to collect the teeth, and the kids got a badge in return. And apparently this was quite the prize, because as they're sifting through all these teeth, the researchers found dog teeth, they found human adult teeth, and little white rocks. They had to institute a system where the teachers checked that the kid had a fresh socket to match the tooth.
No counterfeit teeth.
In the end, Needleman's team collected and tested over 3,000 bona fide teeth. From there, he was able to sort the kids based on their lead exposure, and he asked their teachers if each student had these different behavioral problems. A clear pattern emerged.
Kids with high levels of lead in their teeth or blood are more distractible, less persistent at their work, less able to follow sequences of directions because they forget what they started out to do.
Were there big demographic ranges of these kids?
Well, that seems to be an interesting sort of pattern that's going on. And like I said before, the broader sort of consequences of... we can even also talk about redlining and gentrification here as well. A lot of working class people were generally forced to stay closer to industrialized areas and even closer to a lot of highways. This is also where a lot more minority communities were also placed, right by the fucking highways. And as a consequence of all that industrial sort of output, sending in a bunch of fucking smog, poisoning these fucking communities, but also being next to this fucking highways coming into the city because of the car infrastructure, a lot more of those people are being exposed to lead. And generally speaking, a lot of those homes were also older as well and had lead pipes also for a lot longer, right? And didn't get fucking replaced as quickly because, they're just a bunch of minorities living in there. Who gives a fuck about any of them, right? And that's like some of the reasoning for as to why people got as poisoned with lead, and that led to the sort of general fucking crime wave that happened within the 90s.
So were they similar in most of those ways?
These were pretty homogenous communities. In the 1970s, these were basically like Italian and Irish families.
Well, that helps mitigate some of the concerns you would have about subjective teacher ratings, because we've seen studies showing that they can...
So yeah, minority communities back during the time. Well, this would have been around the times of the 30s and the fucking 50s, right? Them also getting a bunch of fucking lead exposure. This makes perfect sense.
Evaluate their kids with a racial bias.
Next, Needleman went in and actually tested the kids, gave them puzzles and listening challenges to measure their intelligence, focus, reaction times. And the kids with more lead in their teeth from infancy scored worse. It remained to be seen how this leaded generation would fare when they reached adulthood. And we'll get to that in a second. But first, I want to pull back the curtain and explain exactly how we made this episode. I started as usual by reading a ton of papers and interviewing some experts, and then I talked to Joss for an hour or two about what I found out.
Let's go.
And to record our calls and interviews, we use Riverside, the online studio for recording and editing video and podcasts.
Advertising. Yeah, Riverside. Very cool and epic.
Was happening? Did he know exactly how it was getting into these kids?
One of the infuriating things is they kind of knew where the lead was coming from for decades.
We're going back to the good old days, putting time in reverse gear.
Since antiquity, humans had known that lead was dangerous. Thousands of years later, Americans still used it a lot. It was nice and flexible for plumbing and made paints much brighter, and according to the lead industry, it was actually pretty healthy. This color...
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Also, yeah, it was used in paint as well. I completely fucking forgot about paint. I was only thinking about fucking gasoline and pipes. Yeah, it was also used in paint on houses and stuff. And if I recall correctly, okay, a fun little fucking history tidbit, right? I think the Romans, they also used lead in some like cuisine and whatnot. Not cuisine, but they used it in like some like rituals and like cuisine because it was very common, very easy to come by, and whenever they tasted it, it tasted very fucking sweet. So there was a lot of Romans who subjected themselves to a bunch of lead poisoning.
Coloring book for kids was published by the National Lead Company. Then, in 1921, these researchers at General Motors found a new use for lead. They had been struggling to deal with engine knocks, sudden, uneven fuel explosions that wasted power, damaged engines, and made for a bumpy ride.
It was discovered that a rare compound of lead, tetraethyl lead, made an ideal anti-knock fuel.
Faster, smoother, more resilient power.
They named their product ethyl, which conveniently omitted the lead part, and had a gentle feminine vibe. But not everyone was convinced. Dr. Alice Hamilton, the first woman on Harvard's faculty, was the nation's leading expert on lead poisoning. In 1925, at a conference about tetraethyl lead, she walked up to GM's head scientist, Charles Kettering, and told him, "You're nothing but a murderer." She warned about the death of...
This was from the they knew about this since the fucking goddamn 20s. Yet, oh, guess what? Unfortunately, GM has a lot more political prominence and power during that time, so, well, time to put in a bunch of fucking leaded gasoline cars, and as a byproduct of this, well, lack of fucking regulation during those times and preferential treatment given to a bunch of these fucking corporations, even during these times, lead poisoning has been allowed to sort of like propagate and perpetrate itself. And of course, because of a lot of white flight from the more inner cities where there'd be a lot more cars in rather confined areas, allowing these further concentrations of lead to sort of propagate, I guess, for lack of a better term, for people to be able to more easily breathe in all this fucking leaded sort of like gasoline. And as a result of a lot of these communities being treated, because mostly minorities lived in the fucking goddamn inner cities, because of the fact that it was sort of seen as being treated more cheaply, I suppose, because of racism, redlining, yada yada yada. A lot more minority communities suffered from more fucking lead poisoning as a result. It makes perfect sense, right?
Of workers who came into contact with tetra.
Also, yeah, byproducts of the sort of suburbanization and car infrastructure that's been sort of generally erected in across the entirety of the United States of America, and very often a lot of those highways would be placed closer by those minority communities, and because of that leaded fucking gasoline, it made it such that a bunch of people were breathing in like lead smog from or not lead smog, but like lead particulates from all of the pollution from all those fucking vehicles.
The lead and the danger to the public from breathing exhaust gases. But no one really wanted to hear it. America was busy remodeling its economy around cars, and there was lots of money to be made.
This is crazy to me. They knew about this millennia ago,
Right.
and we get to Gen X, and they're still. I mean, why? How is that possible
It's
that they were
really
still allowing
outrageous.
kids to be exposed to this stuff?
I looked over the next 40-odd years of papers on lead exposure, and most of them come from a single lab that was named after Kettering and funded by General Motors and the Apple Corporation. They focused on acute lead poisoning, which allowed them to say that the science behind chronic exposure and long-term harms was unresolved. Their work reassured the government and the public that all that leaded exhaust, dusting, plague.
Okay, yeah, they did this on purpose so they can just basically say like, oh, actually, no, who cares? It's not that big of a problem. Don't let us take the lead out of the fucking gasolines. Don't regulate us, please, 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 because again, lead is a pretty common material, very easy to come by, which means it's really, really fucking cheap.
Big rounds and paint chipping off walls. That was probably fine.
This is the most serious environmental disease of children. And the lead industry has attempted to obscure this. The more we study lead, the more we find effects at lower and lower doses.
Lead is so harmful in trace amounts because of that ability to mimic calcium. Calcium plays a key role in signaling throughout the nervous system, and lead disrupts that. Infants are particularly vulnerable because their brains are still getting wired up, and they often have higher exposure for the simple reason that they're always putting stuff in their mouths. Needleman saw the effects of this in Boston, and when he tested other communities, he realized that this tragedy wasn't impacting every part of society equally.
So 1 out of 14 privileged white children had an elevated blood lead. For poor whites, it went from 7% to 25%, and for poor blacks, it was 55%. We're talking about 3 to 4 million American children.
They're calling me one of the biggest, most smartest people in terms of fucking politics because I know my fucking basic goddamn history. Like, yeah, a lot of it is because of fucking redlining. Yeah, it's meant to mostly affect fucking poor people. Yeah, privileged white children also suffered from this as well, but they're living in gated sort of communities away from the sort of like more smog-filled, heavily fucking polluted inner cities. They do not have as much exposure to leaded gasoline. Yeah, sure, there's still potentially leaded pipes and also like leaded paint, which can also cause adverse effects on a lot of them, but the gasoline, the particulates in there, that is why. 7% of those probably live near golf courses, pesticide central. Was there a lot of lead in fucking early pesticide? I mean, it makes sense, right? Like, probably also like fuck with bugs and stuff like that. But that also just is going to get into the fucking water supply as well, and also probably cause a bunch of fucking consequences as well. Yeah, I digress. It turns out lead is actually. Guys, I think having a bunch of fucking people being fucking lead poisoned for no reason might be kind of a bad thing.
Are at risk for brain damage due to lead exposure. That is a datum that our society will reject at its peril.
A poor neighborhood is more likely to have more old houses with lead paint and to be close to major roads. When I think about my exposure, my childhood home was built in 19...
I'm too good, man. I'm so good at this. Why am I so good at this? Oh, the exact fucking same shit. Not lead, but sulfur. Oh yeah, that's also bad as well. But yeah, like, it's So this is going exactly along the line that I was predicting, like, to the fucking goddamn T. Yeah, inner cities are more than likely going to have roads closer to them. There's going to be a lot more fucking car traffic. There's a lot more highways there because of redlining. That's how a lot of these cities have been inherently built, right? To basically disenfranchise a lot more impoverished people, to disenfranchise a lot more fucking poor people. But that's the entirety point of the fucking policy. And since there's a bunch of leaded gasoline, pipes, and also paint, because these are cheap materials on these cheaply made fucking houses, the likelihood of you sort of dealing with more exposure from lead significantly fucking increases.
1960, so before 1978 when lead paints were banned. But there wasn't much traffic on my street. The parks where I often played, on the other hand, were right next to an interstate highway. But luckily for me, decades before I was born, the U.S. got an unlikely environmental champion.
All set?
Hi, Richard.
Clean air and clean water. These are part of the birthright of every American. We must act, and act decisively. Okay, the other one now.
Yeah, Watergate jabroni over here who wanted to continue the fucking Vietnam War at all fucking costs was the main guy who put in the fucking EPA, which is so fucking funny to me.
When Richard Nixon signed the Clean Air Act of 1970, he set into motion a slow phasing out of leaded gasoline. This line shows the amount of lead from gasoline per capita over the years.
And blood lead in children and adults dropped. That was a real public health trial.
So we make the transition to lead-free fuels, but the story isn't over because lead is about to make the U.S. a more violent place.
Murders are on the rise, and the statistics are really grim.
Each of us is concerned about the rate of crime.
I made this graphic data from the FBI that shows the
So I guess we're now in the fucking 90s. So this is going exactly like I thought it would. Oh, the consequences of fucking lead leading into the rise of fucking crime because people's brains were not able to fully be fucking completely developed because of all of the leaded gasoline, paints, pipes, affecting a lot of people's sort of like developmental sort of processes. Affecting people's developmental processes. Yeah, that's correct to say. And a lot of people having to deal with the consequences of a bunch of fucking lead poisoning. Basically causing a significant increase in a lot of violent crimes. You know, the robbery, assault, murder, rape, yada, yada, yada. You know, we know about, like, all the fucking violent crimes. We know about the crime wave that happened in the 90s in America because of the fact that, the consequences of the lead industry saying like, oh, actually, yeah, lead's totally safe and totally okay for people to ingest and have. Like, there's no problem with lead whatsoever. No problem with long-term exposure to fucking lead. No. And because of a lot of the rather terrible economic policies of Ronald Reagan, that's another fucking compounding factor as well that have led to a lot of people starting to perpetrate more crime. It's a twofold issue, right? I mean, these guys are probably going to focus more on the lead aspect, which I do think is a big effect, but I think it's also very, very important to point out the consequences of Ronald Reagan going after labor rights within America, right? In terms of the good old wage fucking productivity gap, if I could just pull that up fucking quickly, wages under fucking Ronald Reagan, they went down. They went down a little bit, but this is pretty much where the stagnation here started happening, right around the fucking 80s, where it started to get a lot worse because of a lot of the tax cuts that Reagan provided during his fucking presidency. A lot of the initial funneling of taxpayer dollars to the rich was starting to happen quite significantly under fucking Reagan. Obviously, inevitably throughout the further presidencies after Reagan, it only got worse and worse and worse, and now we are currently in the position that we find ourselves under. But along with the funneling of resources from the working class to the upper fucking classes, along with the fucking lead and the sort of crime wave that happened as a byproduct of all the leaded paints, pipes, and gasoline, led to this fucking crime wave that happened during the 90s. Thank you, Ronald Reagan, for, again, causing another thing with your terrible fucking policies.
National rate of violent crime. In the early 90s, America's leading criminologist, nicknamed the Dean of Death, predicted that these rates would stay elevated or keep on rising. Instead, they fell, and experts are still debating exactly why.
A lot of people in social science were thinking about the decline in crime, which at that point was still like confunding everybody, right?
When I looked over newspapers from this time period, I found lots of articles crediting new policing strategies and the waning crack cocaine epidemic. But Jessica Wolpaw-Reyes was one of the researchers with a different theory.
Yeah, that was also, the crack cocaine epidemic, which Ronald Reagan helped exacerbate with his really terrible zero-tolerance policies. Very cool. Thank you, America.
Pregnant with my son, living in a very old house in Harvard Square, and I learned about lead exposure. In looking into that, I discover Needleman, right?
By this time, Needleman had shown that the Boston area kids with higher exposure were more likely to drop out of high school, and other studies found that higher lead exposure meant increased risk of juvenile delinquency and arrests for violent crimes.
It's affecting the whole life trajectory of the individual.
Kids born in the early 1970s, when leaded gasoline was peaking, would have reached adulthood around 1990. Those born during the phase-out in 2000. If you shift the lead exposure curve forward 22 years, it lines up with crime pretty well.
But I have been cautioned against laying lines on top of each other like this and drawing a causal connection.
There's a whole website that demonstrates why this is dangerous. Tyler Vegan's Spurious Correlations. It finds lots of lines that overlap nicely. So, no one's saying that, like, eating margarine is causing divorces in Maine, or if you name your child Jordan, they're going to rob a bank in South Carolina. But these
that's not how that exactly works, right? But the reason why we can make that fucking sort of correlation here is because, like, lead exposure peaked during the fucking 70s. Now all those people are hitting adulthood during the 90s. And because of a lot of the economic problems that were also fucking happening as a byproduct of Reagan's policies, and also all the fucking lead exposure, it led to all these people doing fucking crimes because they were not going to school. Duh.
There are pieces of data that really line up really well.
Yeah, I mean, part of this is you actually have to have a mechanism
Right.
for this kind of thing to be persuasive. And obviously, these ones there's no connection. But with lead and crime, there's a plausible connection. But is there something else that we go further to confirm it?
Right. So, it's hard to look at one pair of lines and say there is a causal relationship. But if you were able to have a bigger sample size, right, this is a sample size of basically one, the entire United States. We're just looking at how these two curves relate. But what Jessica did was she broke it down by state.
It's kind of like a natural experiment where different states had different time paths of the reduction of lead in gasoline.
So what would you expect if lead was behind crime? States with larger decreases in lead would see larger drops in crime. And that's exactly what Jessica found.
You can't come up with another story that would explain exactly why lead would have moved in this particular way in these particular states, and then crime would have moved in a matching particular way 22 years later.
For every 10% cut in childhood lead exposure, she saw a roughly 8% drop in violent crime.
The economists were all like,
oh, whoa. So it turns out, I don't know, zero tolerance policies in terms of dealing with crime is really stupid. And also the byproduct of fucking goddamn Reagan's policies also had an effect on crime waves as well. And also because of fucking lead exposure. Shocker. The thing that was warned about in the 20s, but General Motors was making a fuck ton of money in terms of the perpetration of the car within American sort of culture and suburban fucking life. Now there was a fuck ton of money to be made, and if there's one thing that the U.S. government likes more than anything, it's making a fuck ton of goddamn money. So fuck you, libtard. Who, I don't know, found this shit out during the fucking 20s. Nah, fuck that. There's money to be made, and we'd rather make a lot of goddamn money.
those effects are so huge, they can't be real. You gotta be crazy. And the public health people were like, yep, that's how big it is. They were like, yes, that is true.
Lead gas had been used everywhere and now was being phased out everywhere, and researchers were able to find a lead crime connection in some other countries. Other places the connection wasn't as strong, and people still debate how much of the crime drop was caused by the phase out of lead. I've seen estimates as high as 90% and as low as 7 to 28%. Jessica's calculations fall right in the middle. Either way, I'm convinced that while there are obviously a ton of factors that influence crime, lead is an important part of the story. We started out looking at these little kids, first and second grade. Then by this lead crime hypothesis, they're looking at crime in the 90s, so these kids are now in their young adulthood. What happens when these young adults grow up and are now, in 2025, in their 40s and 50s? And that's a really hard question to answer, partly because it's just really hard to follow people throughout their life.
Oh no. That's like Trump's biggest fucking demographic. Oh no. That's like that. Oh no. That's like Trump, like Gen X fucking divorced dads and shit like that. It's all people who fucking were exposed to a significant amount of lead poisoning during the fucking 70s, dude. Stinky.
Needleman did a follow-up with his kids like 10 years later when they were graduating high school, and he was only able to get like less than half of them to participate again. So that skews the entire study because the people who are doing the worst, if they're dead or sick or in prison, it's hard to find
likely
them.
to participate.
So to investigate the long-term effects of lead, we have to go to the other side of the world, 1970s New Zealand and the southern city of Dunedin. Researchers attempted to track the health of every single baby born in this hospital in 1 year, 1,037 babies in total.
The New Zealand cohort has sometimes been referred to as the best studied people on Earth. Across the lifespan of the study, recruitment each phase has remained really high, up in the sort of mid-90%, which is really important because it means we don't miss the people who are doing the worst.
And what are they asking these people when they check in on them? Are they taking blood?
Everything.
Are they doing really?
Their professional lives, their mental and physical health. They do blood tests, they do cognitive tests, they do psychological exams. And one of the tests they did early on was for lead exposure.
New Zealand had some of the world's highest levels of lead in its gasoline. For some reason, in our cohort, kids from wealthy families were exposed, kids from poor families, kids from middle-class families. There was no social patterning to lead exposure, but it meant that we were able to ask, what are the long-term consequences of childhood lead exposure?
Right, it makes sense why probably there was not as much pattern in terms of social standing for a lot of lead exposure. If I were to take a guess, that is more than likely because of the fact that policies like redlining and gentrification probably not as prominent within New Zealand. Now, I'm not 100% certain if New Zealand had like social housing or something, or stuff like gentrification along fucking racial lines in comparison to America. that sort of that country is probably a lot more homogenous in terms of its ethnicities. Probably a lot more fucking white people live there. Probably some like indigenous communities as well. I'm not sure if it was as prominent there. I wouldn't be surprised. I'd have to like probably take a look more into some history there about New Zealand in terms of how they treat minority sort of communities. I'm going to operate on the assumption that it probably wasn't the best. If I were to take a guess, like they are the branch that broke off of the Australians, and the history between Australians and their indigenous communities are not very good. A lot of bad blood there to this fucking day, even where they still get abused to this day by a bunch of differing governments that have been in power before. But I digress. It makes sense that probably, given the fact that the sort of stratification of where people are living within New Zealand is probably not as fucking crazy sort of pervasive, that's the word I'm looking for, as in comparison to the United States of America.
Across the social spectrum.
This graph breaks up the subjects into groups by lead exposure, least to most, and shows how much their IQ has changed from childhood to when they were 38. Now, I should mention here that the researchers aren't holding up IQ as some perfect measure of intelligence, and they acknowledge that it's been misused and misinterpreted in the past. We only have time in this episode to unpack IQ, so I highly recommend you check out Veritasium's deep dive on the subject. Anyway, the point is that IQ has been around for so long that it's a useful way for researchers to track cognitive health.
And the ones that we use are standardized so that we can compare people to themselves over time. The kids with the highest exposure actually lost more IQ points as they aged. They also had altered personalities. They were less agreeable. They were more neurotic. They just seemed to struggle more with regulating emotions, planning for the future, staying organized.
And that affected their social mobility.
Kids with low exposure tended to do better than their parents, and then kids with high exposure actually experienced downward social mobility.
Pretty compelling.
It's not just changing how distractible you are in first grade, but it's having a lifelong impact. This study and others like it established the long-term effects of lead on individuals.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Because you're less likely to pay attention. You're less likely to sort of want to be like someone that's agreeable or sociable or to want to work around. I'm very curious if the same thing is going to be, the same sort of study rather, is going to be done on people who are exposed to a lot of like internet brain rot. Because I feel like could internet brain rot be the lead poisoning of our time? I'm curious, like, I feel like I might be onto something here, right? It's certainly very, very similar because of this sort of like hyper commodified nature of social media and how it's essentially constructed in a way to only keep your eyeballs on it at all times. And so people, in order to keep your eyeballs on social media as long as possible, will generally sort of push the most derisive sort of like easily sort of viral, like brain rotty sort of videos in order to make sure that you keep scrolling on the fucking platform. And a lot of like argumentative, more dramatic sort of videos and scenes are what gets pushed more in like social media algorithms, things that are more inherently disagreeable, which sort of helps incentivize that sort of very disagreeable, aggressive nature that people generally speaking have. You know, it's a theory, you know, talking about how social. I'm curious. I would like to sort of examine that even more, sort of like posit some arguments and positions there. I might have to write that one down for myself. I'm interested for that. Saying that social media engagement is the lead poisoning of our generation. I'm very fucking fascinated to think about that.
But Aaron wanted to use these findings to calculate the effect on an entire country, specifically the U.S. First, he gathered leaded fuel levels and blood lead tests to estimate the childhood exposure of all Americans. This graph has a bar for all the 10-year-olds, all the 11-year-olds, all the way up to 85. The subset of each group who saw the worst exposure levels are shown in red.
For certain year cohorts, there's almost no one who wasn't
genetics right
exposed to
there.
levels that today would trigger case management.
In other words, if you tested that high today, a doctor would want to find the source of the lead. And that unsafe level was experienced by everybody on this graph outside this deep blue color. It's about half the country, 170 million people. Gen X was hit the hardest, but some millennials were still hit by the tail end. And I wondered what color I would be assigned on this graph.
So that is your baby tooth.
Okay, wow. Manish embedded my tooth in epoxy and sliced it in half, and then he hit the open face with a tiny laser. He ran the stuff that was blasted off through a spectrometer that read the concentrations of different elements at a 10 micrometer scale. The first element he looked at was barium. Breast milk has more barium than solid food or placental blood, and so a surge in barium marks the moment breastfeeding began.
You can just see that little thin line. Before that, that's your prenatal history. That's what you were doing as a fetus. And now this is lead. The levels are very low. They're hovering in the blue-green area, which means you're very low. You were born after the peak of the lead exposure crisis. It also depends on whether you're the firstborn or the secondborn. Much of the lead that comes to the fetus comes from the mother's stores. Most likely your mother was alive, and exposed to lead, because all of that generation was. And the firstborn really is absorbing or clearing out most of the lead from the bones. So I'm guessing, I remember you saying,
Oh, so if you suck on the fucking tit, you're also sucking in the fucking lead that's in the breast milk. Oh no. Yeah, there fuck it is. It's not just lead in the fucking goddamn water. It's lead in the fucking mother's breast milk.
saying you did have an older sibling.
Yeah, she flushed out the lead for me, so that was
That's
nice.
well, in medical
That's
terms, we wouldn't put
funny.
it quite like that, but maybe you can buy her coffee.
What would this look like for someone born today?
It would look even more blue, and that's what we are saying, except, and it really depends on where you are born. There's still some high-risk location in the U.S., for example, older housing in East Harlem.
And this is the baby tooth of someone who encountered much more lead than I did. The red line most likely shows where they inherited their mother's lead stores in the womb, and then the green area indicates unsafe lead exposure after birth. And if there was lead
Oh my god, that's... Oh my god! That's fucking crazy, dude. Oh no. Guys, I think we're starting to learn why a lot of fucking Gen Xers and like divorced dads are fucking Trump supporters. Oh, it's because of a high amount of fucking lead exposure. That is like a whole layer of fucking bone. 1000% points me. This is fucking crazy.
in this person's teeth, there was also lead in their brain.
Something like 800 million IQ points had been lost by the US population. The population who grew up in the late 60s, across the 70s, and early 80s would have lost the most IQ points.
And there were other effects on our minds. These curves show...
Okay, because here's the thing with like fucking dumbass conservatives. They'll talk about like the sort of like depreciation of like, I don't know, like testosterone and sperm and all this fucking like exposures. None of them ever fucking talk about lead poisoning. What conservative have you ever seen talk about fucking lead poisoning? Have you ever seen any of them talk about that? It's curious, no, right? They'll talk about like fucking microplastics. They'll talk about I don't know, like eugenics and all this other fucking bullshit. But you never hear them talk about fucking lead poisoning. I wonder if it's because of these sort of like pseudo-intellectual tendencies of conservatives to not want to engage with any form of scientific studies, because we have the studies, the correlations are there. It's just like, man, there's a lot of places that have significant amounts of correlations with exposure to lead in terms of people's sort of IQ, ability to be able to participate within society and all this stuff. Maybe we should start thinking about getting rid of this stuff. And having listened to what's her fucking goddamn name? I forget the name of the lady in the 20s. But yeah, maybe we should have actually listened to her, and instead of just allowing GM to put lead in the fucking goddamn gasolines. We never would have thought that it would have actually gotten this fucking bad.
How lead shifted the distribution of ADHD symptoms for different generations, according to Aaron's model. For some cohorts, the average person has more symptoms, and the extremes have shifted up as well. The effect is similar for anxiety and depression.
At least 150 million cases of mental illness requiring treatment that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't put lead in gasoline.
As these cohorts age, we're sure to see more health effects from lead.
Cardiovascular problems, kidney, liver. I have a hypothesis that we might see greater rates of things like dementia. The lead exposure of the past. It's not actually in the past.
We live in a leaded world. It is not just about crime. It is about all sorts of social behavior, just the ways that we relate to each other.
Lead is still mined in all of these countries, and it's still used in products, especially batteries.
I guarantee it's not going to stay in those products. It's going to find its way into our water, our soil, our food, our bodies.
We've been successful in the United States to some degree by being able to phase out lead from our main sources of exposure.
But old sources of lead occasionally still cause problems. In Flint, Michigan, changing water chemistry caused lead pipes, which are actually normally pretty safe, to corrode. And in Milwaukee just this year, lead paint from some old schools made its way into children.
Child lead exposure tracked to a Milwaukee public school.
They asked the Trump administration for help managing the crisis, but everyone at the CDC's childhood lead poisoning prevention program had just been fired.
You fired the...
Hi, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Man, honestly, he's really, really good at just doing eugenics and fucking killing kids, whether it be with wanting to take away vaccines, letting them die from fucking measles, from vitamin A fucking overdoses, but now it's fucking lead poisoning. Very, very cool, RFK.
The entire team, whose job it is to support communities like Milwaukee.
Kennedy claimed these cuts had been an accident, and a week later said this.
We have a team in Milwaukee, and we're working with the health department in Milwaukee.
But that wasn't true.
That came as a surprise to leaders in Milwaukee.
It came as a pretty big surprise. That formal support has ended with the termination of the childhood lead team.
Recently, Kennedy got around to rehiring the team he had accidentally fired, and he says that he wants to eliminate more toxic chemicals from the environment.
Every single fucking goddamn time with this stupid fucking administration, it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna just randomly haphazardly just fire people because we don't think that they're useful. Yeah, sir, a bunch of people are being killed now because of that team that you decided to fucking fire for no reason. We're just gonna rehire those guys silently. It turns out they were actually doing very, very important things. Every single time, like, there was all the people at the sort of like weather services who got fired by Trump and then inevitably rehired. The Doge guys also fired a bunch of people who also all inevitably got fucking rehired. It turns out a lot of these sort of administrations and like sort of committee positions and the federal government being the size that it is for a country as large as the United States of America with as many people as it has, which I would argue probably needs to be bigger in order to be able to have these systems operate more efficiently. But conservatives do not want these systems to operate efficiently because in reality, They want as much deregulation as possible, so then, corporations can essentially grab more fucking goddamn money for themselves in order to just make more of a fucking profit for themselves. Yeah, third largest population on the earth. That's true. Boy meets mini. What, about 350 million people? Makes a lot of sense that you probably have a very, very large administrative state in order to be able to take care of that. It's also one of the largest countries on the fucking earth. Makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of differing populations, differing sort of problems that each has to face in these certain states that they're in, yada, yada, yada. It turns out, like, cutting a lot of that may have some fucking consequences.
Meanwhile, history makes it clear that industry won't regulate itself.
The approach we took with lead is mirrored by countless other products we're using now, where we like to say, well, if we can't see harm, let's just use it.
And sometimes, let's just use it even if we do see harm. Just one example, researchers found evidence that a common pesticide was hurting the brains of babies. But after Dow Chemical donated $1 million to Trump,
Friend Andrew, Chairman CEO of Dow Chemical Company,
his EPA director refused to ban it, saying the science remains unresolved.
Can we get some fucking duck smoking gif emojis? Can we get some classics in the chat, please? Well, you're telling me that dude with Dow Chemical, which also does the Forever Chemical stuff, all the PFAS stuff, yeah, that's also that guy as well, which is also having adverse effects on people as well. Yeah, and the EPA is not going to fucking regulate it at all, any of that whatsoever, because Lee Zeldin, who was the former head, was also the head of the EPA during the first Trump administration. He's an oil and gas lobbyist. So yeah, EPA is not going to enforce any of its fucking action in order to be able to regulate all these fucking chemical companies.
You can get really wrong for decades before you do something about it.
The long-term consequences of giving industry even freer rein are going to be horrific.
It's a lot of work to put together these episodes, and the best way you can help us make more of them is by...
Wow, you're telling me that the Trump administration is totally okay with a bunch of people just dying and has no problems whatsoever causing further and further suffering of more and more people. But yeah, it was a great video there by Howtown. We certainly learned quite a lot about, the adverse effects of lead causing correlations with fucking crime. And also, well, making it such that people are more gullible and wanting to vote for the Republican Party more and more so because of a lot of the cognitive issues caused by lead fucking exposure. Yeah, a lot of it is because of fucking lead exposure. Shouldn't be really surprised about that. I certainly want to work on that fucking theory of how social media is the current lead poisoning of our time. I might have to workshop some ideas about that. I'm interested in tackling that sort of idea because I really do think that it is the lead poisoning of our time. Like, we are seeing these sort of adverse effects that social media is having on the current youth right now, making it such that they are less sort of able to engage. Now, I'm not going to be able to conduct studies into all of this. I'm not like an institution, but I would love to see if there have been studies done into sort of like maybe not like correlations, but like seeing like the effects that people consuming a lot of fucking TikTok and like internet brain rot, AI slop, generally speaking, have on kids' sort of like developmental sort of kids' sort of like developmental path. That's the term I'm looking for here. I guess that's sort of like still happening, and that's a study that would have to be done eventually. But I'm very, very curious to see how that exactly works out. But anywho, I'm going off on a little bit of a ramble here. A great video here by Howtown, and yeah, I was able to sort of make a lot of the calls here for as to why there was a large amount of crime within the United States of America, these sort of adverse effects that lead has had because of, suburbanization, car infrastructure being built, generally speaking, throughout the United States of America, and how that's currently affecting the brains of fucking Gen Xers, who are the main demographic who voted for Donald Trump and the fucking Republican Party. But yeah, broadly speaking, I don't think there's like really much else to say besides it turns out lead is actually really, really bad for you. And the Trump administration is, basically going to unleash a super lead 2 electric fucking boogaloo into the population. Well, I guess besides super lead 2, but actual lead as well, in terms of their deregulatory sort of policies and their sort of haphazardness in terms of how they conduct themselves and a lot of people are going to suffer the consequences of further chemical exposure to not only their sort of developmental processes that are being done throughout life, but also people being able to engage and conduct themselves within fucking society. Don't think there's really much else to say besides that.